Hello and welcome. In this video, we're going to be discussing how to multiply and simplify square roots. So our first step is to multiply our two square roots together. So we're going to take the square root of 50 times 3 times the square root of 24. Now one of the things I want you to notice is how I said this second guy. Notice that there's no operation that separates the 3 from the square root of 24. So when that's the case, normally that just means we're multiplying those two things together, and that's the case here. So I'm going to rewrite what we have really as the square root of 50 times, I'm going to use the dot for the times, and then times the square root of 24. Okay, great thing about multiplication is that it's commutative, so I can switch my terms around. So I'm going to write this as 3 times the square root of 50 times the square root of 24. And then another great thing about multiplication is it's associative. So I'm going to leave the 3 here, and then I'm going to multiply these two guys together. So remember that when I multiply two square roots together, what I end up with is one square root where what's underneath is the product of my two original numbers. So underneath the square root I have 50 times 24. Okay, now in a lot of cases I might actually multiply those numbers together, but if I did that here I would end up with something huge. And when I'm simplifying square roots, my first step is to factor whatever I have underneath there anyways. So I'm going to leave it like this because it's actually going to help me for my second step. So my second step in the process is to factor my radicand. So what I'm trying to factor is what's under the square root. So notice I already have a pretty good start because I've got 50 times 24. So I'm just going to take 50 times 24, and we're going to try to factor each thing as much as we can. So one way to factor 50 is 2 times 25. Can't factor 2 anymore. 25 we can factor into 5 times 5, and then I can't factor those anymore. 24, one way to factor that is 6 times 4. I can factor 6 into 2 times 3, and 4 into 2 times 2. And then that's as far as I can go with those factors. So then overall, underneath my radical, I really have 3 times the square root of, let's see how many 2's we've got. So I've got 1, 2, 2 2's, 3 2's, 4 2's. So underneath my square root, I'm going to have 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. So I've used up that 2, that 2, that 2, and that 2. And then it looks like I have 1 3 and then 2 5's. Okay, final step then is I just want to simplify that square root. So step 3 is to simplify. So that guy out, the 3 is going to stay out in front. And then remember the way that square roots work. Square roots are basically the opposite of a square. In other words, they're going to undo squares. So for every square that I see, I'm just left with one of those factors. So what I mean by that is, let's look at our 2's, for example. You'll notice I have a 2 times 2 here. When I take the square root of that, I'm just left with 2. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to group my factors into groups of 2. So I've come up with one group of 2 2's. I've got a second group of 2's. So that means I can pull out 2 factors of 2. And then I've also, well, I'm kind of stuck with the 3 because I only have one 3. It doesn't have a partner. So that means I can't really do anything with it. I can't pull any 3's out. But at the end, I've got a group of 2 5's. That means I can pull a 5 out. And so notice that what I'm pulling out is actually just getting multiplied together and it's getting multiplied with what was in front of my square root initially. Okay, you'll notice that underneath my square root, I still have this 3. So he's just going to stay underneath the square root. And now if I multiply all those numbers together in front, I get 3 times 2 is 6. 6 times 2 is 12. 12 times 5 is 60. And then I still have the square root of 3, which I can't do anything with. And that's my final answer. Okay, here's another example to try. So try this example, pause the video, and then come back after you've given it a shot. Okay, so our first step is to multiply. So again, since multiplication is both commutative and associative, when I multiply, I've got 4 is going to be in front. And then when I multiply those two square roots together, I get the square root of 75 times 54. And now what I want to do is I want to take that 75 and 54 and factor those both. So I'm going to do that over here. So 75 is 25 times 3 is one way to factor it. And then 25 is 5 times 5. Can't go any further with any of those factors. 54 is 9 times 6. And then 9 can be factored into 3 times 3. Can't go any further. 6 is 2 times 3. Can't go any further with those. So then overall, what we have is the 4 stays in front. And then underneath, I've got, let's see here, 1, 2. And then I've got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4 3s. And then I've got 2 5s. So now our only step left is to simplify that square root. Well, one of the things that I notice is that I can't do anything with the 2's because I would need 2 2's in order to pull 1 out. So we're trying to make groups of 2 with our factors. So if I look at my 3's, I can make 1 group of 2, 2 groups of 2. So that means I can pull 2 factors of 3 out. So I already had the 4 in front. I can pull a 3 out, and I can pull a second 3 out. And then I can also pull a 5 out. And then what's underneath my square root, it looks like it's just that 2. So if I multiply those numbers together, I end up with 4 times 3 is 12. 12 times 3 is 36. 36 times 5 is 180 times the square root of 2. And that's the final answer.